What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Heck versus Hell, where the truth we tell. Welcome to all you beautiful listeners, you new and old, from every age possible. Sorry about that. I had something pop up for me. But welcome to everybody that is on here today. If you are a recurring, what is it called? A recurring listener. There you go. A recurring listener. Welcome back. And yeah, you already know how we get into these things. We don't go into much of a background synopsis all the way. So, but you know what? Let's try to structure this a little differently, okay? Welcome once again, but let us go into this, and hopefully here in the future I'm going to try to go and start doing some of these things so we can be able to somewhat listen to them on YouTube. I want to say, creating some kind of imagery, maybe even going and creating full blown artwork. I don't know if you've ever seen those videos on YouTube where they actually have like almost like a storyboard, right? And Lex has been telling me about that for a long time, about how those are really good ways, especially to expand it. And I've seen, oh man, I can't remember what channel it is. It might be like I know it's Tim Mackey. He's the Bible Project. There you go. The Bible Project, where they go and they do different types of animations. They're not hardcore animations. They're just like, following along what they are saying, right? And maybe we can get into doing some of that for our episodes, because a lot of these so far have not been visual. They have not been properly recorded with our faces. So being able to do that, hey, we'll go and start reviving all the other ones and, bring them back to life pretty much. Okay, so that might be something you can look forward to. But yeah, right now we'll see what's going on with that. But anyways, look forward to that. Be on the lookout. We do have a lot of things rolling out. So I'm not exactly sure when you even are listening to this. Oh, actually, it's oh yeah, it's gonna be right here this Friday, thankfully, because sometimes we gotta go a little bit ahead of the recording. But yeah, it's a very complicated situation. I don't know if you guys have heard too. There's a mini moon now in orbit as well, and I'm kind of interested in that. We might have to do a little bit of an episode on that one because it is something that is unique. There's been a lot of things happening this year. What was it? That one alignment. I can't remember what it was. It might have been the solstice. There was a solstice of the planetary alignments that came across different places. I think it was like all these places that it basically was over, was Salem, I believe. I can't remember. I gotta look into it, and then we can go and take it on a biblical recourse of how that is going on. Hey, we might just do it on True Seekers Mastermind Alliance because we have been having some juicy episodes on there. And if you haven't heard them already, go check them out because ooh wee, they are getting good. We need to still do that other one that I've been waiting for too. It's gonna be We Are Not Alone Part 2, where we're gonna go into different conversations of aliens, shapeshifters, witches, warlocks, witchcraft, gnomes, mythical creatures, and all this different type of stuff. So that is something to definitely look forward to. But as you very well know and see from the title of this episode, this is going to be a different conversation that is surrounded on influence. Okay, and I named it this specifically, out of suggestions and the voice of God, because it's not a completely on the topic of influence, and that's also another episode that we're going to have later down the line, where it's more hardcore on influence factors. But this is something very crucial, and it really goes hand in hand right there with it. And I want to have that distinction. And, maybe we should have titled it something else, but it's going to be the correlation of it as well, to bringing it towards how we can further hear God's voice, how we can further understand when God is speaking to us, when we are not the ones doing the thinking. So it's a really great conversation to have, because it's something that I actually took a long time to figure out in myself, and after listening and having a lot of people try to show you how to hear the voice of God, it it can get redundant, and it doesn't give you some of the key factors, because as you may know, there is so many times when, yes, there are situations when you can go and ask God a question, open the Bible to a random place, and boom, right there, that's the verse, that's what he's telling you. There's so many different ways of communicating with God and how God communicates with you, but we have to understand that it is a correlation. So we have to have that voice internally rather than externally. If we're always looking for signs, if we're always looking for opening up a random page in the Bible, or hearing it from someone else, it doesn't give us that alignment of understanding that we are a piece and a portion of God, and God lives within us. So that's what we're going to be going on in this conversation about: the interior mindset of hearing God's voice, of understanding it is God that is speaking to us. And one of the biggest things that we have to look at is influence, because there's a huge differentiating factor whenever we begin to understand what is our voice and what is God's voice. And one of the things that I have heard that's really good is, if it's actually more so used in a statement whenever people are arguing, oh well, the Bible was written by man, so why should we listen to the Bible if it's not the word of God? And this is one of the arguments that have pretty much been used to eradicate that type of, not conviction, but that argument. And they basically say, well, if it is a man writing this word, writing these sequence of books, if it's completely up to man, why is so much of the Bible and the foundations and principles of the Bible against man's fleshly desires? And of course, whenever you ask that question, people can't really answer that. But it goes to show that we have different desires whenever we are born into this world. We have a different mindset. We have a different way of living. And we can look at that even in the way we were created. We were created in the flesh, and if we start looking at all the biological factors of everything that correlates into our human survival, then we can truly begin to understand that we have different intentions. And one of those intentions back in the day, whenever we didn't have food like that, in different tribes and stuff like that, one of their focuses is on survival, on being able to gather and look for food. And this is also whenever we start getting into, the anatomy of the human body, whenever we look at the pineal glands and how we have the adrenal glands and cortisol. And all of these come together to basically give you that fight or flight. I can't remember the words, not synopsis. It's kind of a word like that. It's the scientific notion of how you say that. I can't remember. It might be like a hormone. No, it's not a hormone. I can't remember. But that basically, those chemicals, the fight or flight ones, and these have a lot to do with, you either fear or you fight, right? Fight or flight. You either run away in fear or you fight. You go and you have, some type of thing that you need to do to survive, and it's different manners of living. And I say that very intentionally because we have dominion over animals. So if we were in a situation, let's say going against a lion, there's tribes in Africa that are taught, and one of their passages, the rites of passages, is to subdue a lion. So they don't have to fight the lion. They have to subdue the lion to the point where you can watch videos on it too, where they go and they all they do is walk toward the lion, and the lion's kind of like halfway running away. Like they know who is the dominant one, who is dominating this species, and ultimately that's what God told us to do. We're supposed to dominate and subdue all the animals on this earth. Whenever we look at that, it's like, well, how does that align if our body would give us that adrenaline to say fight or flight? Why is God telling us to subdue them? Because I mean, let's be honest, a lot of us face to face are encased in a lion or a tiger enclosement where you have no way of escaping. It'd be pretty scary because we know that they have just incredible muscles. They just have these weapons and arsenals that they can use against us, whether it be their claws or their jaws or their teeth, everything at their disposal. They are literally made to be the top predators. So, it's hard not to fear, to be quite honest. It's hard not to, let alone get adrenaline whenever you're going through that. So, that further goes to reinforce the fact that we do not have the same desires. And this is where we get into the conversation that we just had last week, too, about the difference between living on earth, living disconnected to God, and living connected to God. And that connected and alignment perspective that we need to have, that's where we have a different form of going and changing our desires, changing our heart, changing our intentions, changing our basic principles of how we choose to live life. Because if you really think about it, the way that Christ and the disciples lived, that was it was bold. It was a crazy way of living. They didn't work for money. They didn't utilize money. They didn't go, and it was pure faith in which they lived on. They weren't out here scavenging or looking for food. It was pure faith on what they lived on. And that's what Christ was trying to teach, that we can live solely and purely on faith. And that is the full attachment and the full incorporation of what it's like to live with God, to be a part of God. And it's so difficult to comprehend too, because I mean, even the disciples, the first Christians that were called that, they were the disciples. Whenever you started getting into Acts and they were going and getting more disciples, right? I believe there might have been, like, I want to say over 100, because there was 72 at first whenever Christ was still walking around. So you begin to look at all of this and see that they were living in a means to where they would leave everything behind, and they would travel in all these mannerisms, basically just showing it's a full walk of faith. You don't need to go with your human innate implanted fleshly intuition to survive, because obviously a lot of the times, and they even said it some of the times too, even the disciples were like, well, we didn't go and buy any bread. How are we going to feed these people? Oh, he's saying this because we didn't buy any bread. Their mind is so lowly that they're thinking on these type of things. So we have to understand we are born into the flesh and our soul. Our soul is ultimately where we are at, but we are more so connected to the flesh because we are living in this world when we are born. And that's why we need to be born again. That is the whole purpose of being born again, because then your soul transfers over to the spirit, and now you are more so following the spirit than you are following the flesh. So your beliefs, your desires, your foundation, it all just starts to shift in a different manner of going into a different way of walking. So you were born again in a new life, and in a real life, in life itself, because we are always going to be connected to God one way or another, whether we are walking with him or walking against him. To go back onto the topic of the conversation, we also have to understand that a lot of our mind is programmed a certain type of way and can always be reprogrammed. There are so many times when one person may go and they have a radical change where God goes and he just completely changes them and molds them in a different type of way. It's easy for them to drop their drug habits. It's easier of them for them to change those patterns. And there's another person where they have to go and continuously try to discipline themselves and fight against that with a partnership of God. So it's not them doing it themselves, of course, and God is still there for support and to continue to encourage you and make you better, but it's a different journey. So everybody has their own journeys, of course. Everybody has their own ways of how they come across God and encounter God and their experiences with God. Some people go and they have incredibly radical ways of being born again. Some people go and they're just at a church or something, and they just go out of nowhere, start praying in tongues, pass out, and all this other stuff. It really happens. Some of it, I will say, some of it does look very ingenuine. But there are those situations where it actually happens and you can feel it on that person. But that's not everybody. There's other people that just have that in the dark by themselves, like myself. I had it in jail whenever I was just praying to myself, crying to God. He softened my heart, and I was giving my tears up to God, and ultimately that's whenever that I felt the renewal. Yet I understood and knew that a lot of the work was going to have to be done by me, and have that enabling to allow the kingdom of heaven to come into me and out of me. I say that to say we still have a manner of how our mind thinks. So, man, I wish I would have had these other episodes out too already, but they are on Soul Ties. So if that is something you are looking forward to, yeah, let's hype it up even more, because that's something that we really need to go on to. I've had notes from like couple years now. Actually, I don't even know how long it's been already, but I've got plenty of notes for that. We're gonna start getting that prepared to roll out. We got the Lex Fed coaching coming out too. That's gonna be a whole different. Ooh, but that's also why I want to go into the soul ties too, because it's more of the understanding and how we operate as human beings, whether it be the psychological levels, the physiological levels, every type of level of why it is that we operate the way we do. And one of those key things is we have a cycle, which is a belief cycle. So we can force ourselves to change a certain belief, but in the same way that we've been constantly talking about all these things that we listen to, right? The music that we listen to, things that we put in our head, the things we watch, all these different types of voices, I'll say, in a sense, all these knowledge and information that we allow to plug into our head, it ultimately has to go deep and embed itself into it, right? So there's a lot of people out here that you're starting to see, they go and I don't want to say are conspiracist, where they go and start thinking about different conspiracy theories of what may be. Some of these are so logical in, understanding, yeah, these are true. These are very, very true. And it's, of course, works of the adversary that they want to keep hidden. But there's other ones that are just really long stretches that they begin to go and make, and it comes from a lack of knowledge in that area. So it is a point of ignorance, but it's also not having a foundation in that spot. So, for example, I've mentioned this before too. If you go and you don't have a belief on whether aliens are real or not, more than likely you've already heard people close to you of what they believe, if they've talked about it, their experiences, whatever it may be. And that can all also influence you into going a certain direction. But if you go and also just have not heard of it, for example, have never heard anyone around you talk about it, and it's a new subject more than likely you're going to go, and the research that you do, the first pieces of information are going to be the most critical to where you stand on in that belief system, if there is nothing in your past beliefs that are contradicting it. So it's I hope that wasn't too difficult to understand, or the complexity of that situation. But basically, that's where we start going into the recognition of how we operate as well. The cognitive understanding of where it is that our minds are in terms of consciousness and comprehending how things work, right? Whenever you see a door, if you've never seen one before, if they've never had them in your countries, you may not know how it works, but you're cognitive enough to go and try to solve the problem, figure out how it works, or in your cognitive awareness, you've gone and you've seen other people do it, even if it was just moments before you. So now you have that recognition next time you see it to say, hey, I know how this works now because I already seen someone do it, because I've already experienced it and figured out the problem. In the same way, if you go and you're an engineer and you know how to solve a certain problem, you can bring that previous experience onto somewhere else to where you over time evolve it, right? And that's ultimately how we are able to progress in science, because of all these experiences that we've had as a whole, as a entirety of a human race. We are able to bring them together and continuously adapt to tweak it and tweak it and tweak it and make it better, and change it. So ultimately, that's where a lot of some of the greatest inventions came from. The telephone. They're like, okay, well, let's try to understand, how can we communicate? Okay, we're communicating through sound waves. How do we go and make it to the point where we can send those sound waves over transmitted frequencies to where people can hear us from very far distance? And they start going and understanding all this information. So a lot of what we do is based off of our recognition, off of our experience and our knowledge. And that's where we start going into auto suggestions. Because if you've ever gone, and I believe there's a movie, Lex told me about it, but I can't remember what it was. But auto suggestions, if you're not familiar with that, is basically ways of getting you to have a subconscious suggestion. So a lot of people in higher places will say, celebrities, people that are making a lot of money, they understand auto suggestions as a manner of what you talk, of how you talk to yourself. Right. So there's people that'll tell you, hey, put sticky notes on your mirror, that say, I am beautiful, or you are beautiful, you are handsome, you have beautiful eyes, all these other things. And ultimately, they start going and they start changing how you feel about yourself. It's a suggestion that ultimately turns into a belief. And the end goal, of course, is the reality. So it starts off as a suggestion and turns into a reality. Okay, so this is something that so many people understand, especially in the advertising space, because these advertisers, they want to utilize this to be able to get you to buy their product. And that's why advertisements are some of the biggest things. So many people know and have heard of McDonald's. It is one of the most renowned places that you can ever find. So why do they run so many ads? Why do they still keep running these advertisements and telling you, okay, well, let's do it here, let's put these here, let's put up all these billboards, let's have the huge golden arches. Why do they keep trying to do that? And it's because they keep trying to be in your face. The more they suggest it, the more they're going to stay on your mind, even if it's subconscious. Even if, and that's why they have such great colors, because they also understand that colors represent different emotions in how we respond to it. Now, of course, obviously, those emotions, they could have been tweaked in a different life. Let's say, red was stopped, or red was go in a different life, and green was danger for example, whatever it may be. But ultimately, they understand that we have certain emotions behind all this stuff. So they utilize that to give us subconscious little hints and suggestions and ultimately influence us to make it a reality. So if you think of French fries, right, you're going to automatically think, oh, well, McDonald's. And there's so many things like that. And this is why they have jingles, try to get it stuck in your head so you can, you know, jingles are very crucial too because they make it to the point where it's catchy enough so you can hear it and you can remember it and you won't forget the name. You won't forget the name. You won't forget who it's from. It'll just stay in your head. It's constantly going to be there and just get you to the point where, hey, you know what? Next time you're at the store, you see it and you're like, well, might as well just try it out or something like that. It doesn't really matter. It's once you get to the point of that crossroad in your life, you already have a deep suggestion in your mind of where it is that you need to go. So ultimately, let's say you go and you're at the point where you're going to get married, right? We're going to use this for example. And right now, I'm sorry, everybody, but I think I can only speak for Americans. I'm not sure because I'm going to use a reference to a jingle. So if you don't know it, obviously we'll have an explanation near the end, but I have no idea how far spread it is. So if you are in America or have lived in America and watched advertisements, this is, a little for you, I guess, to test what it is. So let's say put you in this situation, right? Let's paint this picture. You're ready to buy a wedding ring for your loved one or an engagement ring for your loved one. It doesn't matter if you're a woman because women are starting to buy engagement rings for their husbands too. So it doesn't matter which, side you are on. Let's say you're at that crossroad. You've had this relationship for them for 7 years. You're ready to take to the next level. You're ready to pop the question. You want to make it so romantic, so great. We understand that engagement rings are one of the most I can't even remember the word, some of the most important portions of the unity of a couple. So now you're at that point where you're like, okay, well, let me start researching what designs I want. And you get to the point where you're like, okay, well, you know what? I kind of like this one. Now to find a store. And if you've watched a lot of TV or you've seen certain type of ads, you start thinking, you're like, man, I can't wait for that kiss, right? I can't wait for the beauty of engulfing and having this relationship of me going, getting down on my knee and popping the question, and they say yes, and we kiss, and it's fireworks, and it's beautiful. Every kiss begins with, and it's a jingle, it's a suggestion that's already in our head. And I know a couple of you just finished that right there, just finished the jingle for me, but it's almost like a trademark stamp of what it is that they use, right? Every kiss begins with K. You're not familiar, K's is a jewelry store franchise over here in America. I don't know how far out they are. Could be over in the UK, could be, in Canada. I have no idea. But it's something where you just go and it's already suggested into you, right? In the same way, fast food, one of our first thoughts is always going to be McDonald's because of how, I mean, yes, it was one of the, I guess, founding fathers of fast food, but its popularity is just amazing in how they have spread all over the world, on how I don't even know what makes them so special, to be honest. I don't even know how they were able to distinguish themselves all the way. Could have just been, claiming those colors as the first ones and just, constantly pumping money into different types of advertisements. And who knows what it was, and maybe even that right there of them saying, hey, you know what, don't use the ice cream machine. And that could be a corporate move so that everybody could always talk about the ice cream machine, because that is one of the biggest jokes. You never know how easy this is. And I actually want to do a test with that later down the line to show you how, I don't want to say how easy it is to go viral, but how much perspective can influence, even if it's fabricated. How much and what factors take place in having someone speak about it so often. And obviously that is something that most people talk about too. It's a well-known joke over here. I believe in UK and Canada too, that it's a well-known joke. Australia, how McDonald's ice cream machines never work. You always try to go ask for an ice cream, and they always say, "Oh well, our machine is broken." Who knows? That could be a ploy to get a mass consensus of bringing people into having that understanding of, you know what? Think about broken ice cream machines out. Well, McDonald's. And then you got to start going and thinking about all this other stuff. And that's also why they use all these partnerships, rather, as well, to be able to partner with different influencers, different movies, different creatives, right? They used to do what? Partnerships with different Marvel characters, McDonald's did. So it's all these things to continuously be in your face. And these are what auto suggestions are. They are ways and forms of influencing you, uh, of beginning the suggestion to where it becomes a reality. So we also have to understand that this is, I don't want to say the only way, but it's the major ways in which both the devil and God work. Because God, he gives us that right of free will, and he respects it as well. He's not going to go and continue to force us and just coerce us into doing what he wants us to do for his will, because he wants us to be, better than everybody else. Obviously, that it wouldn't be free will at that point if we had that type of understanding. So all God can really do is have that open door of a relationship. But when we're trying to hear the voice of God, and I'm going to cut it short, and we're going to have to do a part 2 here, but when we are talking about understanding and hearing the voice of God, we have to understand that God is not going to force us to do anything. And we have to properly see what the desire is to take a certain action. Because there is many times, especially now, when there will be an opportunity in your face and you're like, oh, it's so much money, this is amazing, and ultimately it gets cut short, and it goes and ends up being completely away from the ultimate purpose of what God wanted you to be on, and it just doesn't work out, or whatever it may be. And we believe, oh, well, this was something from God. Why did it fall through? And ultimately, that's why we also have our own will in God's will, our own position and role to play in God's ultimate will and purpose. So understanding and having this discernment, of course, is going and understanding the character of God. That is why it is very important to go and spend time with God, whether that be reading the Word of God, reading who God is, the actions, the positions, the roles, the principles, everything that is taught from here. We have to understand all of this so that we can have that discernment to go ahead and say, you know what, this is God's will, or you know what, I don't believe this is something God would put in my face. And that's also where, if it is a difficult enough situation, we can go into prayer and start talking about it. And I'm saying this as a point to lead it up to that part 2, because we're not done here, okay? We're not done in all this full understanding of it. And another one of it is going to be differentiating our thoughts from the voice of God, or for the flesh from the devil. So this is something that is going to be very crucial in that next episode, in that part 2, because that's further going to help us understand who God is and what his voice is. So I love each and every one of you. I hope you have a blessed weekend. And we're coming up on that new year here in what, 2 months, 2.5 months. We're at the last quarter, everybody. We're at the last quarter. So let's hit it running, hit the ground running, get ready and prepared for this 2025. Join us, stay updated, join our email list so that we can continue to update you on everything that is going on apart from the beautiful messages that we love to share with you. I love you all. I hope you'll have a blessed weekend once again. And we will see you on the flip side.